It's Wednesday, and here I am. We're going to talk about TMJ, something that so many people suffer from. And you can have different kinds of TMJ symptoms. You can have TMJ that comes in pressure. You can have TMJ that comes in pain. You can have TMJ symptoms that come in you can't open your mouth, all those. But let's start identifying what TMJ really means and what it is. So I have this lovely picture right here that I'm going to lift up. I've got this lovely picture here, okay? And in this picture, I'm going to show you that the TMJ, T is the whoopsie, wrong way. T is the temporal bone. M is the mandible. M is your mandible here, and J is this joint between them. I'm going to show you on the skull, okay? It's a little easier for me on the skull. Okay, so on the skull, what we've got is we've got this temporal bone right here, this brown bone. And look at, there's your ear canal right in there on this temporal bone. And the ear canal, look at how close, when I put the mandible back onto the skull here, look at how close it is. That's a little dark, but can you see how close that is to your ear canal? That the actual part of your mandible here is, it's called a condyle, is so close to my ear canal. And that is one of the deals is that my mandible actually, I love this picture that I'm going to show you, is that the mandible here, this is a great picture. So the mandible right here, you can see this, whoop, oh my God, you know how hard it is to point to the right thing when you're showing it in the picture? Anyway, your mandible is strapped, right? Here's my mandible. Here's the TMJ joint. Here's the joint. This would be part of my temporal bone. And right in here, there's a little disc. But look at in this picture, look at how close it is to your ear canal. I am telling you guys is that so pressure, feeling pressure in your ears is also can be a TMJ issue. Now it can be other issue. I mean, you can have pressure in your ears coming from other places in the body. So you kind of have to discern which is which and what is what, okay? So temporal bone, mandible. Now here's the interesting thing is that when you're working with orthodontists and so forth, or somebody who is specifically a dentist who specifically works with TMJ, one of the things you get is you get them making appliances a lot for the mandible, So they're making appliances for your mandible, right? And one of the deals with the mandible is that, as you can see in this picture, in these pictures, notice how your mandible is hanging by ligaments off of your head. So my mandible, unlike my temporal bone, where my temporal bone is one of many bones that is in my, oops, go the wrong way, one of many bones that's a part of my head, the mandible, and you notice how now, this is done, and notice how his mandible's gone. See how easy it is to break your mandible? No, anyway, the mandible fell off, but you can see in the picture how it is that your mandible is ligamented on. Well, if my mandible is ligamented onto my head here at the joint, right here in the joints, then what's happening is that other structures can change the position of my mandible. So to always look just at my mandible to being the one that's actually the problem in TMJ, right? Temporal mandibular joint. And the dysfunction is often looked at from the mandible side of it. And I personally believe, in all these years of working with a lot of TMJ, I believe that the biggest part of this is actually coming from the temporal bone. I mean, here's the interesting thing about your temporal bone. I want you to notice all these bones of the head. So we have the blue bone, which is your occiput at the back of your head. You have your green bone. Thank you, Don, for being colored. Your green bone, which are your parietals. You have your frontal, which is here in sort of a yellow color. And notice that you have all these other bones like cheekbones, and notice the red bone and all of this. Here's the deal. Teach this in cranial all the time, is that when there's some kind of compression or some kind of issue that has happened to the head in some way, what happens is the compressions or the torquings or the slippage of those, slippages, I shouldn't use that word, but you have some kind of compression thing happen. The actual architecture of this temporal bone is such that if I have tension here, this is going to move to try to release some pressure from the tension. Uh-oh. One of my main bones of my TMJ is now moving because something has happened somewhere else, right? You get a concussion, you go through the birth canal, right? You fall on your head, you get hit by a baseball. Any numbers of things are going to change the position of my temporal bone because some kind of something else is happening in the cranium. They call this like a set screw, meaning that when the compressions happen, this will torque or change in order to try to release pressure. And I have to tell you something, is the really interesting thing is that on this left temporal, the left temporal, is that bone out of all the bones is the one that mostly, when you're going through the birth canal, the left temporal bone gets really dragged and changes position. So I find, as I talked about, I think I did a live one on like ear infections and all of those things, is that that's one of the biggest reasons that later in life you're going to end up with some kind of a pattern, and it tends to be doesn't always have to be this way, biggest pattern in the left hand side because it drags. Okay, so alrighty, so why am I looking over here when I really want to look over here on my temporal bone? I want to know what's happening in my temporal bone. I want to know what's happening in my temporal bone to know what it's translating into my hanging mandible, right? I want to know that. I want to know how my mandible is being affected by my temporal bone. That temporal bone, boy, a lot of us have a lot of stuff that goes on with the temporal bone that we don't know about. And I have to say that if I'm working on, say I have 10 or 20 people in a week that are coming in that I have to do cranial on, every single one of them has something going on with the temporal bone, and almost all of them have it going on with the left temporal bone. So when you're looking at TMJ, it is so imperative to really look and assess the temporal bone. If the temporal bone has to have some kind of correction, help with it. So that's one of the big pieces that I think about, TMJ. Another piece that is going on with TMJ that's really big, I'm trying to think which way I want to go first, is that, so here's the interesting thing is this. I think it's interesting. And I had to write a paper on this. Totally had to write my second year, big, fat, ugly paper in osteopathic school at the end of the second year. My big paper was on the relationship of the temporal bone, the maxilla, your upper hard palate bone. Let me show it to you. The upper hard palate, this bone right here, okay, my maxilla. And actually my mandible here, my maxilla, and I had to write how it's in relationship to, let me show you a picture. I've got a great picture of this. How it's in relationship to the back of the head and to the first and second cervicals. Uh-oh, uh-oh, uh-oh. I mean, I had to write a big paper and do a lot of research. This was a lot of years ago, though, to tell you, is that, so there is a direct relationship to how my hard palate is, my mandible is, to, and actually there's a floating bone here, the hyoid, and it's in direct relationship to How is the bone at the back of my head? My occiput. How is my C1 and my C2? What's their relationship together? Like, how are they doing? Translates directly to the front. Translates directly into how my whole jaw and occlusion and all of this is actually doing together. You guys, so it's always such a much bigger picture. This is what keeps it interesting. You know, I don't think that I would still be in this field after all these years if it didn't have this interesting kind of stuff like this. And so let's also dissect a little bit into the whole occiput, C1 and C2, and how they do together. So let's talk about that, because it's super important to know that if this is translating forward into how my jaw and how my complex here is doing, then I need to be aware of what's going on there. It's like very reciprocal, okay? So one of the big things about C1 and C2, well, I'll start with C1 and C2. Out of all your 24 vertebrae, C1 and C2 are actually the most adaptable. They're adapting for how you're planting your feet. They're adapting for how you're sitting. They are adapting for what's happening in your gut. They are adapting for your tailbone fall. They are adapting for the tensions in your head. So C1 and C2, your first two cervical vertebrae, are adapting, trying to help your head be in the right place, which mine isn't, and I can see this, is that they're always adapting, trying to get your head so that it's sitting on the horizon line and working that way, right? So if my C1 and my C2 are the most adaptable, what is it translating into my jaw and into my front? So you gotta, like, it's super important to think about these things in a bigger, broader kind of way. You know, everybody gets very enamored with just the muscles that have to do with here. And, you know, I haven't even brought a picture out of the muscles here. I've only brought pictures out of the bones and their interrelationships between things. So I think that the muscle tension that gets created from other sources first, and then it shows up in the muscles. Because you remember that muscles are really they're only about movement. That's all a muscle's about. Muscle's about movement. It knows on and off. The fibers fire and turn, they shorten, so that makes me move something, and they turn off into neutral. So that's what a muscle does. So a muscle doesn't have a lot of intelligence, right? So it's following what's happening in the area. So what I want to say is that if you feel like you always have neck tension and stuff like that, it's the muscles are what is the result of something going on somewhere else. You know, it's a big picture. I have to say it's a very, very big picture when you're looking at that. Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit more. So I've got the occiput, the very back of the head, and my first two cervicals are relating to what's coming off and what's happening in the front, okay? So definitely need to check in on that when you are trying to help somebody with the TMJ, okay? Now another piece. Here's a really big piece. So when they're going to correct for TMJ and say you have some kind of pressure, one of the big things here is my hard palate. So let me hold up I wish that I can't get this fixed either. This is a bummer to me. So anyway, here we go. So one of the deals, look I have it right there. Look, it's right in the way I want to show it. So one of the things that happens oftentimes in TMJ is that what you have is the occlusion, which is the bite, is incorrect, okay? The bite is incorrect. And sometimes what you're seeing is that somebody is pulled forward, right? The jaw is pulled forward. But one of the questions I always have about that is the jaw forward, or is this maxilla, this bone of the hard palate, too far back? Has it gone back? Because I want to tell you something. Anybody that you see with depression here, when they're depressed in here, and I have a couple of them, actually, a crazy one. Here's a picture. This is so fun, though. Here's a picture of this baby. I'm going to get it close. He, not only he or she, I don't know what it is, if it's a he or a she, is not only are they pressed in because these are too deep, but you can also see that already that there's a rotation in that maxilla. In the upper part of this baby is a rotation in this maxilla. You can see it by the very line underneath the nose is in a little twist and an angle. What it's also doing is it's taking the jaw with it at the same time. You can see a fuller cheek on one side and a slightly narrower one. Is that a cute baby or what? But you can totally tell that it's pushed back. This part of it is pushed back and it's twisted. That's another thing is that you can have a maxilla that's twisted. I find it all the time, all the time, all the time. Not only do I find all the time that the maxilla is pushed backwards, and a lot of time, and that happens a lot through the birth. I mean, you're getting dragged, your face is dragging, if you're doing it at all correctly, down your mother's sacrum. Your face is facing backwards in your mother. And so you're getting dragged down, and it often pushes this part of you deeper. Let's see, I have another picture. Let's see if we can see this. Is that, okay, in this picture, that person is deeper. That person has some other stuff going on too, but just telling you that they're definitely, whoops, I'd like to be pointing at this one. They're definitely deeper. It's not a great one. I wish I had found another one. I didn't, but I wish I had. But anyway, so if the maxilla is too far back, it can make it seem like the jaw is too far forward. Now, that doesn't say that the jaw isn't sometimes forward, because what's happening here, where is this? We love this. All right, let me see if I can show this. Yes, good. Okay, so in here, here's my mandible, and here's that, what they call the condyle that comes up and into the joint, okay? This is part of my temporal bone, and it's a little bit cut away, because it's showing you the little disc. There's a disc, like a little cushion, that's between the condyle and the temporal bone. There's a little disc. And one of the things that happens that's so common is that the condyle can go in front of the disc, or the condyle can go in back. So what can happen, I'll exaggerate. So what can happen is that this can go in front of the disc, or it can go behind the disc. So that is super common, very common for this to, I mean, you can have them both be back, you can have them both be anterior, you can have one be back, and it's really interesting because there is a way to help reposition that. Once you have loosened the muscles and the ligaments and stuff like that, there is definitely a way to reposition this so that this top of this condyle right here, okay, the condyle actually goes back and sits how it's supposed to sit in the disc. But it's really also very common that it actually goes behind the disc and presses right into the ear canal. So, these are all things that we need to be aware of around TMJ, is that what is the whole cranium doing, not just my mandible? What is happening with my palate? Is it too far back? Is it twisted? Because the further back it goes, the more it compresses into the disc space. Like, it's not direct, it puts tension into the disc space. So that's another piece. Now we've added what is happening in the entire cranium that's actually going to move the temporal bone. And how is the temporal bone going to be sitting so that the mandible can be in relationship to it? And now we have another piece in here that says what is going on in the cervicals and the occiput in the back of the head, And how is that translating into and changing my TMJ complex? You know, what is happening there? Of course, then we have the other good one that I haven't even mentioned, but the one that's like where you have poor posture, and therefore all of this is your head and your head and the jaw is all hanging out there with it not sitting on the body, you know. So we also have that. You know, there's many things that change where we are in space and how something is hanging out. And but you know, I have to tell you, there's some definite places, you know, how do I want to say this? You know, in one way, the body is incredibly simple. In other ways, the body is incredibly complex. But one of the things is that as you learn about the body, if you can begin to hold some of the patterns, or no, that's not what I want to say. If you can hold some of the principles and also know certain things. For example, I'm just going to throw something else that isn't TMJ-ish out here, is that, you know, I've had in the last couple of weeks several people come in who have said, I have right shoulder pain, and then I have right hip or right knee pain. And immediately, the first place I want to go check is there tension around the liver? And in every one of the cases where the person had right shoulder and right knee pain, it was liver. So one of the other things about compression and pressure in the ears, not only is it every single thing that I've been telling you, but also you want to know if they have kidney and adrenal tension, kidney tension. Kidney tension puts pressure in the inner ear. So that's another thing. So there's all these ways in which the body actually has these maps. That's what it is I want to say. That there are these maps in the body. And once you start to learn them, when someone says something to you, if you're a practitioner, they say, and then your head goes through the catalog. Check, 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 check. Oh, this is what I know about that. And then what you do is you're curious and you go about proving which one it is. This is how this works. I am not Einstein. What it is that there are certain patterns for things. The kidneys make tension go down the back and into the pelvis and down the inner knee. But the kidney tension makes pressure going upward. So you get to understand, you get to start to understand different kinds of things like this. So somebody comes in with TMJ, the places that you want to check are the neck and the back of the head. You want to check that the excuse me, that the maxilla is in the right place. You absolutely want to know what the temporal bone itself is doing. These are things that are an absolute must for you with TMJ. The others were just examples because God knows I can't keep my mouth shut. Anyway, I love telling you guys stuff. I love teaching you. It'll be so nice when I can actually have you all in person again at the school, which is great fun, great fun. Hey, I'm going to just say this, is that I am going to do a couple of free presentations coming up at the school in the fall for prospective students and people that want to come and listen and stuff like that. It'll be on some Saturday afternoons. So watch the Facebook page for that stuff, one in October and one in early December, so that people who are thinking even a little bit about coming to school come and listen and talk and share and be a part of all of it. So thanks much, you guys. It's such a pleasure to always share with you, and I hope that this was helpful for some people. Bye now.